This is the Wandering Mike.
Welcome everyone to the Wandering Mike. Today I'm here with Jim. Hey Jim, what's up?
Hi, Mike.
So we gathered here on this beautiful day, and to get us started, maybe if you, Jim, just want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your life, so we get an idea of what it is you do, what your journey has been like, and then we can go into detail about some of those.
Okay. Well, I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published it in the book Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. As for my qualifications, I'm a polymathic intellectual whose areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, parapsychology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, education, human potential organization, and music.
Wow.
So that's the short version of who I am.
That all sounded very interesting. So you already talked about what it is you discovered, Septemics. Before
Right.
we go into more detail about that, maybe if we want to go chronologically, you talked about all the things you were interested in, all the things you
Mhm.
had qualifications on. So what was it that originally made you study philosophy, science, all the things you were interested in? Where did the desire to discover these things come from?
Well, the short version is I was born that way. I have no memory of a time in my life when I was not intensely interested in learning everything taught in every university. Now, of course, that's impossible, but the drive is still there. So I went to school for 28 years and I was a scholarship and honor student all the way through. And eventually, uh, I discovered Septemics and then published the book so people could have it so they would benefit from it.
Right. So for most of my listeners, um, well, me included, until a couple of days ago, we probably have never heard this word Septemics. So,
Right.
um, if you maybe just want to introduce it in a few words and tell us
Sure.
what it is that you actually discovered here.
Okay. Well, Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word Septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique. And together they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, dilemma, situation, difficulty that any person has that has anything to do with humans can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one.
So maybe just to bring that back to you self personally as well. So from what I understood, is that kind of what your dream, your goal was always like? Like you said, you had the pursuit of knowledge. You wanted to understand everything and everyone. So is kind of the Septemics, is that the result of your life, basically trying and finding explanations for all these phenomena?
Well, it certainly is a result of my life. Let me tell you how this came about. The
Yes.
story really begins when I was accepted into engineering school at the age of 16. Now,
Mhm.
at that time, of course, I thought I was going to be engineering physical things such as motors, airfoils, electrons, and so forth.
Right.
But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me that I wanted to engineer the human psyche
Mm.
because it is the area of greatest unknown, of greatest mystery, and more importantly, it is the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the problems that people have in industrialized society are because they don't understand people, don't understand the wife, don't understand the husband, don't understand the son, don't understand the mother, don't understand the boss, don't understand the employee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's why more than 50% of the people in the United States are not married. And more of the people who are married, more than 50% of them get divorced because they don't understand people. And that's why we elect crazy people and idiots and criminals to run our governments. So this subject resolves that problem across 35 axes. Uh, and when I say 35 axes, if I may, I'd like to tell you the names of these scales that I referred to, so
Please
you'll
do.
know exactly what subject matter is covered in the book. Okay?
Mhm.
There are 24 scales, which basically are for people, and others for individuals. And there are 11 scales that basically apply to groups. So these are the individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group spheres, the group scales, the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales by itself can dramatically improve the life of the reader. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I mentioned the scale of motivation. One of the most important things to know about a person is his motivation.
Right.
So this is not hard to do. These scales are very user friendly. So you could take that scale and you can ask yourself, what is my wife's motivation? What is my brother's motivation toward me? What is my teacher's motivation toward me? What is my grandfather's motivation toward? And you could use this 300 or 400 or 500 different times or ways, just like that. And then you could take the reverse vector and say, what is my motivation toward my next door neighbor? What is my motivation toward my girlfriend? What is my motivation toward my grandfather? And so forth. And use it another 3 or 4 or 500 different ways. Now, by the time you finish this exercise, you will know the motivation, incoming and outgoing, of everybody you have ever known. Now, by that time, you would be a greatly clarified person. Because when you know the motivation of somebody, you really can understand where that person is coming from and why he does what he does. Now, the other thing you have to realize is every time you correctly find a level on any one of these scales for anyone, either yourself or another, you have a realization. So you're reading it, at least it's thinking, oh, what's my mother's motivation? You get down to level 5. Oh, that's a motivation. That explains why she did bop and a bop and a bop and a bop and a bop. So you have a realization. And every time you use it, that's what happens. That's one of the ways that you know you found the right level. If you spot a level and there's no realization, you found the wrong level. There's always a realization because it's an insight into the person. Oh, that's what this person is about. Doesn't matter what scale you're using. So what happens is you become more insightful and more insightful and more insightful. And the more insightful you become, the easier it is to use the scales. And the easier it is to use the scales, the more you use them. And the more you use them, the more insightful you become. So this is what you might call a virtuous cycle. Or once you get into it, your life keeps getting better and better and better and better because your mental clarity keeps improving. So let me give you a general example of how you might use this. Let's say you have a buddy who's having romance problems, right? Common problem. So you see your friend John. Every time you talk to him, he says, Mike, I don't know what I'm going to do. My wife is driving me nuts. She's blowing dope. She yells at me. She doesn't clean the house. She doesn't take care of the kids, blah, 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 right? Well, you get tired of listening to this after 6 months. So you say, Joe or John, come here, let me show you something. And you open up the Septemics book to the scale of relationships. And you put it in front of his face. He says, what's this? He says, it's this, you say the scale of relationships. You mean there's a scale of relationships? You say, yes. This relationship that you've been complaining to me about for 6 months, where is it on this scale? I guarantee you he is going to want to know that because he's having trouble with this. See? So now he's going to look at this. And in seconds, I mean like maybe 20, 25, 30 seconds, he will find a bracket. Meaning he will say something like, well, I can see right off our relationship is not at level 1, 2, or 3, because that's the top of the scale, and we're having a lot of trouble. See? So he's got it down to 4 now. So you say to him, well, why don't you just read the text? And then you can get this exactly. I guarantee you he's going to want to do that because you are opening a door for him to a new place of enlightenment. So he reads it. He knows the relationship. Now he knows the material. He comes back and he says, well, now that I looked at it this way, I can see we're at level 5. That's not so good. That's near the bottom of it. No wonder we're having a lot of trouble. And that explains why. See? And you say, very good. You know, we can move you up from level 5 to level 4. He says, you can? You say, yeah, it tells you in the book how to do that. But before we do that, let me show you something else. And you open it up to the scale of sexuality. Well, you see, that's relevant to this situation he's complaining about, right? So he looks at it, he says, you mean there's a scale of sexuality? You say, yes. You don't have to tell me if you don't want, but where are you on this scale? And I guarantee you he's going to want to know that because he's having trouble in this. So he looks at it and he's going to find a bracket. He's in a matter of seconds, like maybe 25 seconds, he's going to say something like, well, I can see right off. It's definitely not 6 or 7. That has nothing to do with us. So you say, okay, read the chapter and then you can get it exactly. So he reads it. He comes back. He says, well, now that I read it, I can see I'm at level 4. That explains me perfectly. But I also realized that Gertrude, my wife, is at level 5. That explains why we're having so much trouble. Those 2 levels are incompatible. So you say to him, well, you know, you could use this book to help bring her from 5 up to 4, and then you'll both be at 4. Oh, see? But before you do that, let me show you this scale of allegiance. And you open it up to this scale of allegiance. Anytime a relationship deteriorates, it's always because allegiance has deteriorated. So he looks at it. He'll go through the same process. He'll find a bracket. He'll say, well, it's got to be maybe 2, 3, or 4 or something. And he's okay. Go ahead and read the chapter, and then you can get it. So he reads it. He says, well, I can see that I'm at level 3. I have fallen down from the top of that scale as regards her. See? And so you say, well, we can move you back up to level 2, and then you'll have a better relationship. See? Now, I could keep doing this explanation I'm giving to you now for the next hour, but I think I have made my point. Because in something like romantic relationship, it's complex. You're going to have 10, 15, 20 different scales that are going to bear on this. And the more he looks at it, the more he's going to say, the scale of control. I wonder where she is on the scale of control. You see, and he looks at it. Oh, I see. That explains why she does this and this and this. Now, by the time your friend John has gone through analyzing this relationship with 20 different scales, his whole mindset about it is going to be different. It's going to be clearer. He's going to understand what it's about, what's been going on, who these two people are. See? Now, what he does with that is up to him. That's not for us to say. He might say, Mike, I'm going to get this book and I'm going to use it to help us straighten this thing out so it's better. You say, great. See, and he goes, now whether Gertrude is going to cooperate with that is another story. She might say, take a hike, I'm not interested. See? And then he might say, well, in that case, you can go to hell, we're done. See? Or maybe she'll say, okay, I'll look at this, you see, and there's some improvement, you see? For them, there's a motivation for them to stay together and keep improving it. Because the more you use it, the easier it is to use, the easier it is to understand, and the more you can use it. And when you realize that every person is at some level on every scale, this is of immediate relevance to everybody. Because the data about you or your wife or your son or your business partner is just sitting there waiting for you to access it. So you get it and you start making these analyses. So what I tell everybody, my students and clients and such, how to use this book. This is a textbook on an entirely new subject. So you should study it like a textbook, the way you would study a chemistry text, a physics text, a math text, an economics text, right? You start on line 1 of page 1 and you read the first line. Okay, do I get that? Okay, I get that. And then you go to line 2, see? And then you read line 2. And you continually go through the whole book until you get to the end and you now understand the whole book. Then you go back to the beginning, read it again, and when you get to each scale, find your level on that scale. By the time you get to the end, you have found your level on 35 scales. So your whole notion of yourself, your identity, your personality will be dramatically enhanced because you know what this is about. You know, oh, yeah, now I see. That's why I couldn't get along with Joe. He's at this level and I'm at that level, you see? So this is a very fruitful source of insight, which is why I can absolutely guarantee if you read this book and you understand it, it will prevent catastrophes, disasters, bankruptcies, indictments, divorces, fistfights, etc., because you'll be forewarned. So when you bump into somebody who's at a low level on a scale, you say, oh, this guy's at a low level. That explains why he's like this, you see? And so after a few of these, you say, I'm not going to mess with this guy. He's a downscale person. See? And it's clear. It's just as clear as seeing the difference between a tulip and a rose. Now look, every tulip in the world is unique. And every rose in the world is unique. but I'm sure you can always tell the difference between a tulip and a rose because you know what they are. And you know they have certain properties, right? The tulip grows from a bulb out of the ground, it has no thorns. And the rose grows on a bush that's covered with thorns. See, they smell differently, they look differently. So that's the way of using this material. Now, let me give you an analogy about how easy this is. Let's say you invited me to your garden. You say, Jim, I understand you're into flowers. Yes. Would you like to see my garden? Sure. So I go over to your garden and I go into Mike's garden and I see, oh, Mike has hydrangeas, chrysanthemums, tulips, irises, peonies, forget-me-nots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the reason I can do that is I know a lot about flowers and botany. I've been involved in gardening since I was a kid. Now, if you bring some 5-year-old kid into your garden, he's going to see and smell exactly what I saw and smell. But all he can say is, these smell nice and are pretty. That's all he knows. See, he doesn't know the word chrysanthemum. And even if you told him the word, he still doesn't have it connected with this particular plant. So most adults are like that little kid about people. They don't know what they're looking at. So this is extremely enlightening. People get this. This is not hard to use. I'll give you an example. When Obama came on the scene running for president, most of us had no idea who he was. Now, the people from Illinois knew who he was because they had sent him to the Senate. But the rest of us in the 49 states, 95% of us said, who is this guy with this funny name who's running for president? Never heard of this guy. So I conducted a septemic analysis of him. I listened to his speeches. I watched him. I watched his body language, see? And I was able to determine his basic purpose. Because everybody has only one of 7 basic purposes. And people tell you their levels. It comes right out of their mouths. So I could see what his basic purpose was. And that informed me, do I want to vote for this guy or not? Because the basic purpose is what the person is trying to do all the time, whether he succeeds or not. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I figured out because, as I tell everybody, you should never tell anyone the level on any scale of any living person. It's unethical and counterproductive. And let me explain what I mean by that. You know how sometimes the wife goes to the husband and says, you know what's wrong with you? You're not ambitious enough. You need to make more money. You need to get a second job. That's not helping him. That just makes him want to get a divorce. See? What she should do is say, Fred, I have this book here called Septemics. Take a look at it. I think it will help you. Really? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And he reads it. Oh, now I see what's going on. You see? And his life gets. Now, the other thing is, remember I told you, every time you spot a level on any scale, you have a realization. And when you tell the person, you're taking that away from them. Telling people things about themselves. Number one, people don't like to be evaluated and they don't like to be invalidated. Now, if you go to somebody and you say, oh, gee, I like your shirt, it's very nice. That's a validation. Okay, that's fine. But if you tell them, you know, the problem with you, you had a blah, 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 they don't like it. So this book is user-friendly. I crafted these scales to wrap around the reader. So let me tell you a little bit more about how this came about. So I told you, I think that I had a career as a human development engineer, right? Beginning when I got out of college, where I used engineering principles and techniques and concepts and devices to help people to gain wisdom, enlightenment, ability, self-confidence, et cetera, depending on the person. Now, all of my clients improved as a result of hard work. But incidentally, I started to notice after a while that I could predict the outcome of the session. I never told this to anyone, but I made notes. And as the years rolled by, I kept making notes. I came to realize that the client would be at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed. And as a result of our interaction, he would go up to the next level on that scale. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times over a 40-year period. And every time it did, it verified my hypothesis because the clients had no idea about this. They didn't know anything about Septemic. They didn't know what I was writing down. I said very little to my clients. My gift was asking the right question, you know? So not telling. So even when people ask me directly, you think I should take this job? I would not tell them. I would tell them, what do you think? See? And then I would lead them to an epiphany. What I was using is really what you could call Socratic dialogue. For those of you who've read Plato, where I would ask the right question and to lead the guy to a realization. I just did that over and over and over. So what I was really doing, years later, I realized I was picking up the guy at the septemic level at which he was and moving him up to the next one higher by using my techniques. So by 1995, a couple of things happened. One was I had about 32 scales that I had simply observed. Oh, if a guy's at this, he goes up to this. And then if he's at that, he goes up to that. And I just wrote these down. And the interesting thing was I would observe this in the session, and then I would go out into the real world, and I would see it right in front of my eyes, the same phenomenon. So that just made it clearer to me that I was into something here. Now, in 95, I was pondering a difficult client. And I realized one day that I had one scale that had 6 levels in it that I absolutely knew were correct because I had been using it for decades. And I realized that this client was at a level on that scale that I had not previously observed. Now, as soon as I saw what that level was, I knew right away where to insert it into that scale. That was not a question. So when I inserted the 7th level into the 6th level scale, the scale then manifested mathematically. So what do I mean by that? All of these data jumped out at me. Now, the whole point of math is you start with a formula or an equation and you coax data out of it. That's how Einstein found E equals mc squared, for example. So when you see data jumping out at you like that in a way that's mathematically interlocking, I said to myself, whatever this is, it has to be natural law because it's got mathematics embedded in it. Now you have to realize I took 26 semesters of math and loved every minute of it. So math is a very real thing to me. I see it in nature. When it appears, I see it. So I saw it. This is mathematical. Then I thought, I wonder how many of these other scales that I have are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way, because you have to realize I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. I wasn't developing anything. So I said, I'm going to look at this. So I looked at these scales that varied in length between 3 and 7, knowing what I was looking for in a short period of time. Each of them went to 7 levels, and when it did, it manifested mathematically. So in a short period of time, I had 32 7-level scales that all had mathematics embedded in them. I said, whoa, I found something. And then my next thought was, if I were to put this in a book and get it out to people so they could use it, this would really help people. So I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as human development engineer, to helping them by the millions if I get this in a book and get it out. So I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft of the book was finished in December of 95. And I then sent it out in a transcript form to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all responded very positively. They had different responses, but the response was always somewhere in the nature of, yeah, this is great, this is cool, I get it. So then I said, okay, this is exactly what I thought it was, which is a new subject that can really help people. Because people get this. You know why they get it? It's natural law. So remember when you first saw the Pythagorean theorem? When you were maybe 12 or 13 in school, right? And you looked at it and you said, oh, this is cool. I see how this works. And you get it, right? And then you have it for the rest of your life. Or when you first saw the periodic table of elements, right? When you were maybe 13 or so in chemistry or science or whatever, he looked at it and said, oh, yeah. Helium is one. Pardon me, hydrogen is one, helium is two, lithium is three. And it goes on down horizontally. This makes sense. Now, before Dmitri Mendeleev invented the periodic table, there was chemistry, but he revolutionized it by making it easier to understand, easier to teach, and easier to learn. So now the periodic table is in every classroom and every textbook in science all over the world, in whatever language they speak. So there's a connection here with Septemic, which is this. People have asked me, what book is your book like? Having gone to school for 28 years, I'm being a well-read person, I have to say in all candor, I don't think there's ever been a book like this, at least on Earth. So what I can tell you is this. Each of these 35 scales is expressed in what you could call a spreadsheet or a table. And that table is very similar to the periodic table of elements, except it's for the corresponding 35 subjects. So I read you the 35 subjects. So there's a periodic table for basic purposes. There's a periodic table for personal influence. There's a periodic table for relationships. And when you open the book, you see these tables, and anybody who can read English really well looks at it and says, oh, yeah, this makes sense. I get it. You know why? It's natural law. So it's like the Fibonacci sequence. You know, there are all these creatures in nature who have Fibonacci numbers in them, like pine cones, sunflower seeds. If you count the seeds one way, it's one Fibonacci number. If you count them the other way, it's another Fibonacci number. So Fibonacci, who was a brilliant mathematician, came along and looked at this and said, there's got to be something to this. Why do these numbers keep showing up? And he was able to look at the numbers that he had, and say, there's a pattern here. And he was able to reverse engineer the Fibonacci sequence out of those numbers. So and he gave it to us. So now everybody in the world who's interested can look at the Fibonacci, and we know the formula. So we know the Fibonacci numbers to infinity. So that's pretty much what happened with this book. I got all this data as a result of my career. And because of my polymathic background, I was able to look at it and say, there's something here. and I looked into it. So after the first version went out in December of 95, and I got all that positive feedback, I then spent the next 25 years of my life working on this book. Because you have to realize, first I had to discover the phenomenon. And I pretty much told you already how that was done in the sessions. Although I did find 3 more skills while I was writing the book. Then I had to take this data and I had to use it to craft a workable philosophic system. That took 20 years. And think about this. As an engineer, like every other engineer, I'm only interested in facts and results. In science, the product is a theory, the theory of evolution, the theory of relativity, whatever it is. That's hitting a home run in the scientific world. But in the engineering world, the product is a thing that works, like a cell phone, an automobile, an airplane, a refrigerator, an air conditioner, right? All of that comes from engineers. So when you're an engineer, you are not allowed to say, oops. You can't just say, oh, the plane fell out of the sky. Oops.
Yes.
You can't do that. Okay? And there's a lot of rigor in the world of engineering so that that does not happen. Okay? That's why we do not accept opinions or beliefs. We look at the facts. If you said to me, Jim, I'd like you to construct a bridge over the stream to me, right? It's about 25 feet wide. Okay? Now, I would not accept 25 feet because it's kind of the bout in front of it. I would take a laser and throw a laser beam across it, and I would write down 23.9 feet. That's what I would work from, you see? So we have margins for error built into everything in engineering, right? So we calculate, okay, this bridge, if this bridge is completely full of vehicles, we can calculate how much weight that is on average, okay? That is not the number we use. We add 10% to that. And that is how we know how strong to make the concrete, how many piles to use, how many cross beams to use, you see? So that's what I was doing with this subject. I worked on it for 20 years until I could see from the response that I was getting from people that this worked all the time for every person. Now, some version of this book has existed since December of 95. That's 28 and a half years. So I've been getting all of this feedback. So what happened is I released the first version of it, right? I told you to my colleagues of mine, all educated men. I got a response. I said, yeah, all right, I'm going to work. So then I rewrote the whole book, making it clearer, better, more precise, more. And then I released it to my clients and my students, and I got feedback. And I looked and I rewrote the whole book. So this book was rewritten at least a half a dozen times because I kept perfecting it. That is what engineers do. See, making it so that everybody was going to get this if he could read English reasonably well and he wanted to improve himself or others. Now, if you have no interest in improving yourself or others, this book is not for you. Now, some people who wear rose-colored glasses think that everybody wants to improve himself or others, and I'm sorry, that's not true. Because there's all kinds of categories of people who have no interest in improving either themselves or others. Psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, corrupt politicians, war criminals, professional criminals, serial murderers, okay? All kinds of terrorists, right? These people are not interested in improving themselves or others. Now, I actually calculated that approximately 50% of the human race has an interest in improving oneself or others. So that's the public for this book. And I have to tell you, it works. I know it works because I've been watching people use this for 28 years. So let me give you some examples of what I mean by this. Very often a person will be looking at this book and he'll be looking, like analyzing, for example, his mother-in-law on the scale of control, right? She seems like a control freak. Let me look at this scale of control, right? So he gets down to level 5 and he says, wait a minute. This is my mother-in-law. This is exactly how she is. See, I nailed it. I don't know this guy's mother-in-law. How did I describe her so perfectly? Because it's natural law. It's just like if you come to me with a right triangle and say one side of it is 3 feet, the other side of it is 4 feet, I know that that hypotenuse is 5 feet. Because I know the Pythagorean theorem, see? So that's what this book is about. It's human affairs through the mind of an engineer. Now, I want to clarify, I went out of my way to make this not be mathematical when you read it. There are a couple of spots in there where I had to explain something mathematical just so it would make sense. So if it has a mathematical structure to it, and I explain what the mathematics of it is, okay, then they say, oh, okay, now I see why it's like this. But I went out of my way to make it non-mathematical. So the experience that you have when you read this book, it's like you put on your eyeglasses and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, oh, I missed this spot when I was shaving. Or you put on your glasses and you look at your girlfriend, you say, you know, when I saw her in the club, she looked a lot better than this, you know? So it's like each scale is like a lens that enables you to see people for what they are. And that's where all this came from.
All right. Thank you for that explanation so far. Maybe to dive a little bit more into detail, because there's a couple of questions that formed in my mind while you were talking. Um, so maybe if it is possible for you to give us one specific example, like one specific scale, so that we can get a closer view into that. And then maybe on that example, um, as I was listening to you, the question that I had is, you already talked about how with some of these things, we get a realization. That's how we know we're on the correct level. But as this is something completely new to the people who will be reading it, maybe are there some tips and tricks, like when you first get into it and you try to match these things? Is it always very obvious, or like how can someone ease into like recognizing these levels, getting more and more confident in that skill? If you can explain.
Okay. So you realize there's about a half a dozen different questions there.
Yes,
So I don't
yes,
know,
I'm sorry.
I don't know if I can remember them all, but I'll try. First of all, let me say this. One of the axioms of this subject, like all sciences, it has axioms. Okay. They're on my website if you want to go and see them. Also, if you want to see an example of a scale, it's on my website, septemics.com. The scale is right there. Okay. You can see the whole scale. And the thing about the scales is you have to look at it. Imagine me trying to explain the periodic table to you without ever showing it to you. That would be
Right.
foolish. It's much better to say, Mike, here it is. Look at this. See? I say, oh, yeah, I see. These are all metals. These are all noble gases. See? You get it right away. But if I were to try to explain it to you, that's what was going on before Mendeleev. So I would
Right.
invite your viewers to go to my website and look at that scale. Okay? There's a sample chapter, the whole chapter's there, and it gives the whole scale. And you can see what it is. You have to look at it. That's just the structure of it. It's like, how could you appreciate the Golden Gate Bridge without looking at it? You can't. See, I could stand up all day and talk about it. It's much easier to just look at a picture. Oh, this is beautiful. I see how it's constructed. See? Now, as far as using it or being able to use it, let me say this. I talked about the axiom. The axiom is this. When a person is at or near the top of the scale, it's because he's insightful in that area. Now, remember I said, when you find a correct level, you have an insight, right? So we're back to insight. Now, when a person is at or near the bottom of the scale, it's because he lacks insight in that area. So he's going to have trouble with that scale. So, for example, when I was in prep school, I had a friend, we went all the way through together in the same class, side by side. And we had the exact same curriculum. I went to engineering school and he became a physicist. Okay. He is one of these guys, anything regarding math or science, he got like 98, 99. Easily. He got it right away. Anything regarding the humanities, like English, history, he struggled. I had to help him with it. So he was good at some things, not good at other things. There are very few people who, like myself, loved school and were good at all the subjects. There was no subject that I didn't like. So that's an exception. Most people don't even like school. So think about this. Let's say you have some dumb thug, right? Who is a professional criminal. He's mobbed up, right? And he steals things, he beats people up, right? He's probably going to be at or near the bottom of most of those scales, if not all. That's why he's like that. On the other hand, you look at somebody like Mahatma Gandhi. Brilliant, beautiful person, courageous. He was probably at or near the top of most of those scales. Now, I already know fewer than 1% of the population of Earth is at or near the top of all the scales. A larger number, much larger number, is at or near the bottom of the scales. So at the top, it's like less than 1%. At the bottom, it's maybe 4% who are at or near the bottom of all the scales. Most of us are high on some scales and low on others. Kind of like my friend who was good in the math and science and lousy in the humanities. So I'm going to give you a historical example. Bill Clinton. Anybody who's been paying attention for the last 30 years knows that Bill Clinton is a smart guy. Even his opponents admit that, right? The Bush family praised him, right? He's good friends with the Bushes because he's a smart guy. You ever listen to him speak? Did you ever listen to him speak? Bill
Yeah.
Clinton? Yeah, he's very smart. It's a pleasure to listen to him speak. I'm not saying I agree with everything he says. I'm just saying he thinks about it. He's informed. He gives an articulate response. It's not blah, 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 like somebody who I'm not going to mention who recently was defeated. He gives you a sensible, specific, rational response. Okay? So if you said to me, Jim, Bill Clinton's coming over, would you like to come over? I would be there in a New York minute. I would love to talk to him, especially about politics. Boy, does he know that. He was very successful. He was the governor twice. He was the attorney general. He was elected president twice. He's the last president ever to sign a balanced budget. Ever. He did it 4 times. and he left office with a high approval rating. Okay? This is a guy who knows what he's doing, right? However, if I had a daughter or a sister, I would say to them, don't go out with Bill Clinton. Because
Sure.
everybody in the industrialized world knows by now, this is no secret, that he's a serial abuser of women. He got many lawsuits from them, and that's why he wound up getting impeached, because he went on the stand, he perjured himself, and he suborned people to perjury. And those are the two things that went to the Senate to try him for impeachment. Those two things. See? So clearly, in this area of life, he is not too smart. Now, JFK did very much the same thing, but he was not a serial abuser of women. You know, he had the most gorgeous women in the world, including Marilyn Monroe, after him, and he was a fun-loving guy, but he did not abuse them like Bill Clinton did. So, you know, he was just a guy who cheated on his wife, and she knew about it. She was no dope. And he said, you know, when he was asked about it, that's between us. See? So we're talking about a smart guy, knew what he was doing in government and knew what he was doing in romance. Okay? Clinton knew one and didn't know the other. So if I were to analyze Bill Clinton on the scale of human ability in his professional field, he would be very high on that scale. I'm not giving any levels. I'm just saying at first blush, he's high on that scale. What if you analyze him on the scale of sexuality? Not so good. So he would have trouble with the scale of sexuality. He would say, this doesn't make sense to me. I don't get this. How do I use this? How do I figure this out? See? So that goes to your question about how people use this. So if you look at a certain scale, right, and you're fairly high in that scale, you're going to have no trouble understanding it or finding your level.
Yeah.
If you're near the middle, it might be a little more work. Okay. But if you're at the bottom, that's going to be tough. There's very few people who are going to look at a scale and say, yeah, I'm at level 7. Because the reason they're at level 7 is because they're not insightful in that area. So that kind of explains a lot. See, if you were to give this book to John Gotti, who died in prison, he was the head of the Gambino crime family. And we know from hundreds of hours of FBI tapes, some of which I have heard, that he was a dumb, ignorant bug. Now, Gambino himself, who founded the family, whose name is in the family, he was not like that. He was a smart man. He was reserved. He was shrewd. He didn't look for trouble. And he ran his family in such a way that there would be no problems. If you sold drugs in the Gambino crime family, they had you killed. They said, no drugs. People don't like that. And if you fooled around with the wife of somebody in the mafia, you were killed. That was the rule. Somebody's married to somebody, you don't go near them. See? So he ran things in a certain way that Gotti didn't. Gotti allowed drug dealing, and that's why they got him. Because his right-hand man, Sammy the Bull Gravano, the FBI got him on dealing drugs. It's 25 years. They said, look, turn state's evidence. All of this goes away. You tell us everything you know. We put you in the witness protection program. We give you a house. We give you a car. We give you new ID. See, he took the deal. And he went on the stand and he named names and gave dates. And that's how Rudy Giuliani, the U.S. attorney, broke up the mafia in New York. Now, Carlo Gambino was not a dumb thug. He was known to the people around him to be a reserved, intelligent, insightful person. I'm not condoning what he did for a living. I'm just saying he was not a dope. See? So he died in his own beautiful home of a heart condition when he was 76. They couldn't get anything on him because he was too smart and he ran things a certain way. See, because in New York in those days, the mafia was totally integrated into everything. Everybody was on the take. Even the local priest knew all about it. Okay? When the local pastor had a leaky roof, he went to the Don. I lived in New York. I know this. We'd go to the local Don, say, Don, we have a leaky roof. We need $10,000 to fix it. He'd say, how do you want me to make this out? Bingo. It's fixed. See? That was going on. Every cop, I knew a lot of cops in New York, they were all on the take. Okay. Now, what was Gambino selling? Prostitution, which is sex. Most people don't give a damn about that. Gambling, most people don't give a damn about that. So, or before that, alcohol, right? That's how they got rich and famous. Everybody wanted a drink, even though there was a law. Many people I've heard from that era told me a lot more drinking went on during Prohibition because half the
I can
fun was you
imagine.
weren't supposed to do it. Let's go to a speakeasy and get drunk. You know, those same people after Prohibition said, let's go to a movie.
Right.
See? So, or like he would smuggle cigarettes up from the South because they were heavily taxed in New York, sell them for a big profit. This went on all the time. Nobody gave a damn about that, you see? So he was smart, as opposed to Gotti, who murdered his boss in order to take his job. Okay? This is not speculation. Everybody knows this, who's been paying attention. So, if you gave this book to John Gotti, first of all, he wouldn't read it. He'd say, get the hell out of here. If he did read it, he wouldn't understand it. I can guarantee that. But even if he did understand it, he wouldn't apply it because it's contrary to his way of life. This book makes you more ethical, more insightful, more communicative, more capable. Okay, so the people who are professional criminals or terrorists, you're not going to find Elon Musk among those people. See, this is a man, he's got smarts, he's got ability. He doesn't need that. He goes out of his way to not get in trouble with the government. This is very well established. Okay, he says there's a rule against that. Obey the rule. See, he doesn't want to get in any trouble. That's what smart people do. They know how to work their way around it in a lawful way. I'm not saying to do something underhanded. I'm just saying you deal with it. You know, it's part of the deal. So whereas stupid people, they become criminals. Whom do you think becomes drug addicts, alcoholics, serial murderers, wife beaters? These are people who are at or near the bottom of these scales. Okay? And I've been looking at this for a long time. That's who they are. It's not a big deal. So, for example, I'll bump into somebody. When I first moved to Arizona 9 years ago, I met a person. And I could see from my first conference with this person, this is an upscale person. This person is high on this scale. This person is high on this scale. This person's, and after 4 or 5 of those, I said, oh, this is somebody I want to be associated with. This person will be an asset to me because it's an upscale person. So I'm still associated with that person to this day. And it has been very mutually beneficial. Now, This person has some lower points on a few scales, but because I know what they are, I can tiptoe around them so it doesn't hurt the relationship. See? Like I have a friend, wonderful person, family man, plenty of money, great sense of humor, but he is what I would call a political extremist. Okay? If you look at the scale of politics, I say in there, those are the people who cause all the trouble. Political extremists. Who is ISIS? Right? Who are these people killing the Jews? See, they're extremists. Extremists are the ones who pursue political ends by unlawful means, by murder, by some kind of violence, by extortion. You see, that's what. So this guy, I know this one scale. So when politics comes up, I'm very careful. I don't say anything. I don't argue with him. I agree. Okay. See, I just tiptoe around it. No problem. And I'll tell you, I have 3 sisters. 2 of them are conservatives, and the other one is a liberal. They're not close. Okay? I get along great with all of them. You know why? I just tiptoe around it. That is something you can get from Septemics. You learn, okay, my husband is not so great on this scale. I'm not going to go there. See? But he's got all the good things about him. See? He's handsome. He's a good provider. He has a good sense of humor. He's nice to me. But he's got this one little thing where he can't make decisions. Well, that's the scale of choice. So you don't say, what would you like for dinner? You just make a nice dinner and serve it. He says, oh, this is delicious. Because somebody who can't make a choice, there are people, you ask them a simple question, what flavor of ice cream would you like? Oh boy, you'll be there for 15 minutes trying to get a straight answer, right? Yeah. I don't know, maybe I should do this. But on the other hand, there's a funny joke about Harry Truman, who said he was looking for a one-armed economist. Because all the economists, he would go to them and say, what do you think I should do about this? And they'd say, well, on the one hand, there's this. But then on the other hand, there's that. So he wanted a one-armed economist who would tell him what to do. He didn't find. But anyway, I hope I answered your questions, at least somewhat. Did I miss
Yeah,
it?
you did.
Okay.
I just want to go yet into more detail after what you just
Mhm,
said. So, just
mhm.
if I understand correctly, so in your opinion, the best way to use the book for oneself is to analyze people on these scales and then because I mean obviously people are different. That's the beautiful thing about people. Like everyone is different and we are
Mhm,
not all the same. Um,
mhm.
so is it like you just described, better to accept these things and see, okay, they are on this scale? Or is it not also maybe possible to go ahead and say, okay, how can I change that person, that upscale person you met, or how can I change my husband? So, what is, in your opinion, the
Right.
better way to deal with
Okay,
it?
so there's 2 scenarios. It depends on the person, right? Let's say your boss, right? He's not friendly with you, but you can see he's at this level and this level. And so you now know what you're dealing with. There's nothing you really can do about it. But
Right.
you get along with him better because you understand him. Now, on the other hand, let's say it's your wife, right? She's not quite right in a certain area. You say, honey, come here, look at this. And you show her that scale. And you say to her, where are you on this scale? See? And if she's not all the way at the bottom, he's
Mm.
probably going to be able to find her level. It's not that hard to do. And then you can help her move up to the next level up. And that's really important because I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled mankind for 6,000 years. And let me tell you what I mean by that. People have problems, dilemmas, situations, and so forth. They can't solve it. They can't figure out, what do I do about this? See? And 99% of the time or more, it's because they don't know the gradient. When you know the gradient, you can always solve the problem. So I have worked as a physical trainer. So let's say some guy comes to me, he's 100 pounds overweight. He says, Jim, I've been trying to fix this for 5 years. I don't know what to do. Nothing that I do works. Will you train me? Okay, I'll train you. So now I'm not going to say to that guy, here's a 100-pound barbell, go lift this. That's malpractice. I would sort of size him up and say, okay, this guy looks like he can curl 20 pounds. So I give him 20 pounds. I say, let's see you curl. Let's see how many times you can curl this, right? So if he says to me, he gets to 8 and he says, this is tough. I say, okay, let's try 15. So I give him 15. He says, okay, yeah, I can do maybe 13 or 14 of these. I say, good. I want you to do 13 on each arm, 3 sets every day. And next week we'll talk about it again. See, I'm finding the gradient. So, and next week I say to him, how did you do? If he says to me, this has gotten quite easy, I say, great. Now let's go to 20 pounds. See? And he's not only going to do 8, he's going to be able to maybe do 10, see, because he's been working out. And I say, what do you do? 10 on each arm, 3 sets every day, and next week we'll talk about it. See? That's why we go to experts to tell us to know the gradient. So, for example, I know a lot about law. I've litigated cases on my own, but sometimes I'll go to a lawyer or I'll go to a website. I'll do, how should I handle this? Should I bring it in this court? Should I bring it in this court? If I bring it in this court, will they accept it? So in other words, I'm finding the gradient. Okay, so I see that small claims, the limitation on small claims is $10,000. Okay, well, this guy only owes me 8. So I can sue him in small claims. See, that saves me a fortune of money. See, I'm getting the right gradient. If I didn't do that, I might try to sue him in superior court. That's much more complicated. See, and then you probably are going to need a lawyer. Small claims court, they don't allow lawyers. Cannot have a lawyer in small claims court. It's for the people. This guy comes in and says, this guy crashed my car and he won't pay for it. See? It's stuff like that. And the judge has a hearing, says, okay, you admit you crashed the car? Okay, you got to pay this guy the $8,000. And you get a judgment. So, see, if I didn't do that research, it's the same thing with motions. How should I go after it? Should I have this guy found in contempt? Or should I bring a lawsuit against him? See? And I okay, the more efficient thing is you just go back to the judge and say, this guy's not obeying your order. Have him found in contempt. See? And then the guy says, well, I better obey this order. See? Because he's been found in contempt. So, finding the gradient. Now, each of these levels on these scales are the gradients. So, on the scale of thought, there are 7 levels, 7 types of human thought. These are not hard to figure out. You pay attention to a guy, and you can see this guy's at level 4. Bingo. So, you know what you're dealing with. So, if you're going to take this guy and try to put him into an engineering program, good luck with that, because his thought isn't high enough. You have to be analytical thought to be an engineer. That's level 3. See? So you can analyze, you can find the right level. So you find, and then here's the thing you have to understand. Because these scales are axiomatically correct, the next level up is always where you will go if you succeed. And the next level down is always where you go if you fail. Now, if you're at level 4 and you try to get to level 1 or 2, you will fail. It's too steep a gradient. It's like giving this guy who's 100 pounds a 100-pound barbell and say, here, go work with this. See, it's too steep a gradient. It's not going to work. Or if I say to him, I want you to go out and run 5 miles a day. Number one, he's not going to do it. But even if he did do it, he would be so sore, he would be cursing me out. See? And he would give up. He would say, I can't do this. I'm so sore. I can't even go to work. See? That's malpractice. I wouldn't do that. I might say, do you think you could walk 1 mile a day? See? And he's probably going to say, yeah, I think I can do that. Say, okay, look, I want you to walk 1 mile every morning. And at the end of the week, we'll talk about it. See? And then I see how he did. And if he says, I can do this easily, now I say, great, let's go to 2 miles. It's finding the gradient. That's what I did with my clients for 40 years. The guy's at a certain level, and I move them up to the next level. So if you have somebody who you have access to, your wife, your son, your employee, your best friend, right? Like I talked about this hypothetical friend, John, who has the romance problem, right? You say, look, John, I'll help you. Let's move this up from 5 to 4. You see? And he will be able to do that if he tries. Now, what he has to do, how long it's going to take, those are wild variables. We don't know how smart this guy is. We don't know how busy this guy is. We don't know how exhausted this guy is, you see? But what I can tell you is, if he's smart enough to figure out that he's at level 5, he can get to level 4. And you can help him. So you can move yourself or another up each one of these scales. Now, having said that, I want to say some of these scales are more volatile than others. For example, the scale of basic purposes. Most people, and I'm talking about at least 90%, live an entire lifetime at one level of that scale. Because it takes tremendous change to move a guy either up or down on that scale. It happens, but it's not common. As opposed to the scale of evaluation. People move on that by the minute. So let's say you have a friend, right? He's never been to a soccer match. He doesn't watch it, doesn't follow it, doesn't know the rules. And you say, hey, I have tickets to the soccer match. You want to go? He says, okay, I'll go. Right? So you take him. So now when he walks in, he's at level 4 on the scale of evaluation, which is neutral. He has no evaluation of it. It's not good and it's not bad. He doesn't know anything. Right? So now 15 minutes into the match, you say to him, how do you like this? He's probably either going to say, yeah, I can see why people would want to pay money to watch this. He's gone up a level. Or he might say to you, I don't get it. Why would anybody want to watch this?
Right.
He's gone down a level. See, if you look at that scale, you see. So it's a matter of minutes. He's moving up and down. And by the time he leaves, he might be at level 2. He might say, this is great. What channel can I watch this on TV? You know, how do I get tickets? He's up to level 2. So that's a volatile scale. And there are some scales that are very stable. Now, for example, in the scale of basic purposes, if you spot somebody's level on the scale of basic purposes, when you come back 5 years later, 8 years later, 10 years later, they're probably going to be at that same level. So you see, that's very valuable to you.
Yeah.
Because you have got that person nailed for life. Whereas evaluation, you don't know what you're going to get. So the next time you see him, you say, so have you been following soccer? Or you probably say football over there. Football. And
Or New
he'll
Zealand,
say,
yeah.
yeah. And he'll say, nah, I lost interest in it. See, he went back up to level 4. He lost his enthusiasm. See, so he's moving on that scale. So people can be helped to move up the scale. Needless to say, No decent person would ever want to move anybody down the scale. That is what criminals do. They move you down the scale, right? So a guy has a bad experience with a woman. She treats him badly. She breaks his heart. He goes down a level. See? Bad experience pushed him down. Whereas if he meets a nice girl and she's nice to him, he moves up a level. So that's what bad people do. People like Hitler and Pol Pot and Stalin and Mao, they move people down the scale. Whereas good people like Abraham Lincoln, look what he did for the blacks. He freed them. And then he had the military, and he pushed through the 13th Amendment, which made slavery unconstitutional. That was his doing, pushing that through. Okay? So he brought a lot of people to a higher level on many of these scales. See? Or Gandhi, where he freed his nation from the British. See? That's what good people do. They lift people up these scales, and bad people push them down. And that's really a good thing to look at. I mean, if you look at Germany, from when Hitler took over until when he left the scene in 1944, it was a catastrophe. He wrecked the nation, right?
Yeah.
The nation was cut up into 4 pieces by the people who conquered them. So that's a downscale person does that. See? So as opposed to like George Washington, very upscale person. See? He liberated his people from what they thought of as a tyrannical government. We don't want to pay taxes to you anymore. We have our own thing going. See? And he liberated. So he brought lots of people upscale. So that's what you see in the world with good people and bad people. I mean, how many people have been helped by Christianity? Millions and millions and millions. I'm not saying all Christians are good. I'm not saying everybody was helped by Christianity, but still the overall effect of Jesus of Nazareth was very positive. Millions and I mean, prior to the last 200 years, most of the hospitals, most of the schools, most of the orphanages in the world were Christian. Right? So all of those people benefited from that way of living. So I'm not proselytizing. I'm just saying this is a guy who had a good effect. He brought people up scale. So that's what I look at when I want to evaluate a person. What is the effect of this? Okay? How did this affect his party? How did he affect his nation? How did he affect his family? So you see a guy, he's handsome, smart, makes a lot of money, right? And he marries this woman. You come back 5 years later, he's unemployed, he's drinking, he's overweight. She divorced him. She took half of his money. See? She brought him down many of these scales. She did not have a good effect on him. There are people who get divorces and stay friends. I know some of them. Look, this is not working. Go do your thing. Okay, goodbye. And they call up for Christmas. Hey, how you doing? Or they're able to be nice to the children together, as opposed to people who are vicious, go into court and lie about you, try to take all your money, slander you. Those are pushing people down the scale. So that's how useful this is, because this is not speculative. It's just like knowing a rose and knowing a tulip. To a florist, that's very important.
Yeah. Um, I don't know if my next question actually has an answer, but I want to ask it anyway, because
Okay.
obviously it is a very complex topic and it has 35 scales, and there's a reason it does have these 35 scales. But
Mhm.
since I do have you here, in your opinion, do you think there is like one or two or three most important scales if someone gets started in studying this field and looking into it? Is there something where you say, if you start off with this, like this has the most effect on you initially starting?
The short answer is yes, but it depends on the person.
Right.
There is a scale of communication. I am not exaggerating. That scale is powerful. If
Mm.
you study that scale and do the drills, because there's a drill for each level, you can become a master of communication. That is a tremendous power
Yes.
to have over people. All right. There are people who, because the way they speak, they get accepted. They get the job. They make the sale. I mean, Ronald Reagan was called the great communicator. That was his nickname. He was a very good communicator. And I don't just mean in giving a speech. I mean in talking to the other politicians and talking to people, talking to Gorbachev. He was a good communicator. Now, he was very successful. He was reelected in a 49 state landslide in 1984. People loved him. It wasn't just Republicans. When you win 49 states, you're getting Democrats, you're getting libertarians, you're getting people who don't even vote. Okay, most of the time. They loved him. You know why? He could communicate.
Mm.
Go back and listen to the very famous speech he gave in 1963 called A Time for Choosing. It's awesome. It's the best speech I ever heard. So, for somebody who has communication difficulties, I would recommend that because there are people who are smart, who are talented, who don't have good communication skills. So, for that guy, that scale is number one. Okay.
Yeah.
In general, I would say the scale of basic purposes is earth-shakingly important because when you find your basic purpose from among the seven, you say, oh, that's who I am. It's like putting on a coat that fits perfectly. And the other six levels you throw out. You say, that's not for me. That's for these other people. I'm not about that. I'm about this. See? And so it makes living very easy comparatively. So that is a very important scale. Also, as I said before, if you spot somebody else on that scale, you've got them nailed. It doesn't usually change. So, for example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the presidents prior to that, who I studied, such as Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson. Because as I said, this is not hard to get. See, I know that George Washington was at level 3 on the scale of basic purposes. If you study the scale and you study George Washington, it's crystal clear. Okay? As opposed to Alexander Hamilton, his Secretary of Treasury, he was a level 2 on that same scale. Very different type of person. And when you study Hamilton, which I did, it's clear he's at a different level. So that's important in terms of that the fact that it endures. It's a persistent trait. So it's really helpful to find your own and to find others. Like like for example, Adolf Hitler is at level 7 on that scale. His basic purpose was to destroy. Now I'll tell you something. I am a serious student of military science. I studied military science. And when I was studying World War II, I would look at what Hitler did and I'd say, doesn't make any sense. Why would he do that? Because, military science has been around for thousands of years. There's all kinds of things that we know you should do and you shouldn't do. And he did things that we know you shouldn't do. And I would look at it as a student of military science and say, I don't get this. Now, when I finally figured out that he was at level 7 and his basic purpose was to destroy, now it made sense. He wasn't just destructive to the Allies. That would make some sense. He was destructive to the Wehrmacht. He was destructive to Germany. He was destructive to his own family. He was destructive to all, because that's who he was. That was his basic. That's what we're looking at Pol Pot. He's at the same level on the same scale. Look at all the innocent people that he murdered. I mean, does that make sense? You see? So once you know, Pol Pot, he's at level 7, now it makes sense. So it's very easy for me to understand people because of this. So you spot certain things in certain people, and, if it's a downscale person, you stay away from them. And if it's an upscale person, you keep them around. Okay? And if a person is high on many and down on a couple, you just tiptoe around that. Like there's a lot of people around, really, fairly reasonable people. They have a job, they have a home, they have a family. If you say Donald Trump to them, they go nuts. Don't talk to me about Donald Trump. See? Okay. That's fine. We won't discuss it. And you don't bring it up. See? Even if it's a joke about Donald, you don't say it. Because, there's a thing called Trump derangement syndrome. And a lot of people have it. It's totally, totally out of whack with who the guy actually is. I'm not saying to vote for him or don't vote for him. I'm not saying he's a genius or anything. I'm just saying these people who have this mental disorder, you can't talk to them about it. You can't have a discussion. I'm one of those people who likes to talk to everybody. I want to hear what people have to say. Well, I listen to Bernie Sanders. I want to hear what he has to say. I also listen to Donald Trump. See, I'm not telling you who I vote for, who you should vote for. I'm just saying I'll listen to anybody who knows what he's talking. Ronald Reagan was a very successful president, was Republican. Bill Clinton was also a successful president, was a Democrat. So the fact that I say that tells you, I'm not embroiled in this fight. I just look at it as an intellectual and analyze it. If I wanted political advice, Bill Clinton would be the first person I would go to because the man is smart. And I've heard him give good advice over the air, so to speak, many times. He was asked about when he was running for election against Bush Sr. Bush Sr. said, there will be no new taxes. Well, then he raised taxes. The American people went nuts. That's why they kicked him out of office. And somebody asked Bill Clinton about it. He said, well, I think he just never should have said that.
Right.
That's a very smart response, He wasn't saying, do it, don't do it. He just said, shouldn't have said. His wife said, half of the voters of Trump are deplorable. Clinton would never say anything like that. He's way too smart to say something dopey like that. To call half the people in the country deplorable. That's how you lose an election. And she did. So, this is very personal and specific. And often I'll be talking to a client or a friend and I'll say, you should look at this scale because this will help you to unravel it. So it depends on the person. There's a scale of spiritual identity. That's a big deal, spiritual identity.
Yeah.
And when you look at the scale, you'll see it goes from one extreme to the other. All the scales go from one extreme to the other. In other words, there are no cases that are missed. There are no people who don't fit into this. That's why I say everybody is on some scale, some level on every scale. So you look at that, and I could look at a guy who's pondering this, and I might say, look at the scale of spiritual identity. See? He might look and say, I see him right here. I had an interesting experience about 22 years ago. I'm talking to a buddy of mine about politics and government. And I was writing the book at that time. He didn't know anything about it. He didn't even know I was writing a book. I said, wait a minute, let me show you something. And I had the scale of government. So I pulled it out. I gave it to him. I said, look at this. That's all I said. I didn't tell him what it was or anything. So he took it. He looked at it. And in 1 second, he pointed. He said, right there. I'm right there. He found his level on that scale without my even suggesting that that's what it was for. He didn't know that. That's how easy this is to use. If you just show the scale to somebody, they'll find their levels. But when they do, they'll have an epiphany. They'll say, yeah, I get it. It's not this. It's not this. It's this. And that clarifies your mind. So this book really helps people to clarify their minds, to figure out what's going on. Like you might have some guy, he's been upset about his mother for 40 years. Now she's dead. So he gets this and he starts analyzing her across all these skills. She was at this level. She was at, and it all goes away. He says, now I understood her. Now I know why she was doing that. She was at this level. So you've kind of relieved him of that burden. Now, I'm not saying that it's a panacea, because he might really need to go into therapy to resolve it completely. But incrementally, it will unburden it for him. He'll say, yes, now I see why she did that to me. Whereas before, he had no idea. So most of these scales, I can tell you, because I've been listening to people respond to this for 28 and a half years, most of these scales, they look and say, I never thought about that before. Yeah. And there's this whole area of human endeavor that they never thought about. And they say, yeah, I can see now. I can see where Trump is on this scale. I can see where Bush is on this scale. You see? And then their minds are clearer. And that's what this is about. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. That was actually very useful. That gave us a good insight into how we can actually use it in a very efficient way. And I also liked that in your answer, I personally saw one of the things that probably makes this book very useful, because when you were talking about just looking at the things logically, that's what you've been saying all along, because you have this mathematical background. I think that's a very cool thing, to take emotion completely out of it, because that's a big thing with humans, is emotions. So to really have it on a logical level where emotions don't play a part in it, um,
Mm-hmm.
that really is a very big and useful part as well. Um,
That's a very
in
good point.
general, yeah.
If you get somebody who's very emotional about something, he's angry. The wife is angry at the ex-husband, So you just have her analyze it, and most of that anger will go away. I'm not saying she's going to go back to him. I'm not saying she likes him, but the anger will abate, because when you figure out, I see what was going on with this guy. He was at this level, though, when he did that. See? That's not anger. That's insight. So that's a really good way to use this, is when somebody is emotional about something, let them look at this, and the emotion will dissipate. He just stops being emotional because his logical mind can come in there and take precedence. Okay, I see what this is. Like, for example, I have many, many close Jewish friends. In fact, most of my close friends are Jewish. So you would think that I hate Hitler. I don't hate Hitler. Was he evil? Yes. Was he crazy? Yes. Was he a tyrant? Yes. But I don't hate him because I understand him. There's no emotion involved. See?
Right.
If I want to say to somebody, you want to see what a really bad person looks like? Study this Hitler guy. See? But I'm not upset about it. Now, there
Mm.
are many people, Jewish people, who are still upset about him to this day. And that's unfortunate because hatred is not a good thing. It wears on you. It saps your energy. It makes you negative. So I try to come to everything in a very level way. And when people get emotional, I don't get drawn into it. Like if somebody says, you're a bum, I'm not going to react to it. Just say, well, okay. Why would you say that? See, they'll go, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. You're entitled to your opinion. See, I'm just not going to get into it because I could probably spot that guy on level on a whole bunch of different scales and understand why he's like that. And if he moved up to the next level, he would be different. He would be better. And I've also seen people go down. I've seen a few people go down scale. You know how you see somebody, his life crashes? Think you have a guy, he makes $200,000, lives in a beautiful house. He has a beautiful wife and a little girl. Well, then the wife and the girl get killed in a car accident. The guy goes to pieces, right? He has a nervous breakdown. He starts taking drugs. Because he starts taking drugs, he loses his job. Because he loses his job, he loses his house. This guy is going down all of these scales. He's crashing down many scales. I'm not saying uniformly, but that's an example of a person will go down a bunch of different scales. And you can see the opposite too. You have some guy, he's a drug addict. He goes to rehabilitation, he gets off it, he stops doing it, he starts working out, he goes to college, he gets a degree, and you see him 10 years later, but he's happily married, he's got a family, and he's driving a Cadillac. Well, that guy went up many levels on many different scales. I'm not saying he went to the top, although that could happen on some, but he went upscale on some of these. And if you want to analyze it, you can. I have taken this book and done complete analyses of people I actually know, where I know where they are on every single scale. And I put it in the book, at the back of the book. So you can see what it's like when you analyze a real person and see how, okay, well, he's good at this, but he's not good at this. And it's very specific. And the specificity is really what gets rid of the upset. Because if you listen to an upset person, it's general. All those white people are racists. That's a generality. Yes, there are some white people who are racists, but most of them are not. So that's an upset guy. So if you get him to look at this and get him to use this book, he would see, okay, I can see this guy's at this level. See, then he's not mad at him anymore. He just sees what it is.
So yeah, that obviously helped you a lot, probably as well as I heard with because that's always something I personally and I think a lot of people strive towards is just trying to minimize our emotional reactions to whatever it is.
Okay?
Um, and just we don't have to call it logical, but just to be in a clear mind to do whatever we actually want to do and not
Mhm.
respond to the emotions. So understanding all these people, all these things that happen in society on the scale level, on this logical level, obviously can help you with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the main reason why most people get in trouble, and to the extent that they do in industrialized society, is because they react. You know, Like some guy slams into your car, you know? You're mad. The hell is wrong with you? You ran a red light, you know? And they get into a fist fight. You get a broken nose, you wind up in the hospital. So now not only is your car wrecked, your nose is wrecked too. See? Somebody who is calm will just not do that. Say, okay, give me your insurance card. Here's mine. And they deal with the insurance companies. That's it. No emotion. That's the way to do it. I was talking to a lawyer some years ago on a lawsuit that I had. If somebody screws me, I bring a lawsuit against them. I'm not going to threaten them. That's against them. I'm not going to beat them up. I just bring a lawsuit. So I'm talking to this lawyer, and he mentioned that I was mad at the defendant. I said, wait a minute. I'm not mad at the defendant. And he laughed uproariously. And he said, you don't get mad. You get even. And I said, that's exactly right. I don't get mad. I get even. I'm going to get my money from this guy. I'm not going to blow a gasket, let him ruin my life. Just going to get my money, period. And so, that's a lot of what you get from this book. You get this, you look at it, you see, okay, this person is at level 6 on the scale of basic purposes. That's a criminal. This person is motivated. His goal is pleasure. He doesn't care what happens to you. He's not going to help you. He's not going to rescue you. He's just going to, hold you up, and take your wallet. That's who that person is. And once you see that, you're not upset about it because you see, okay, that's what he is. It's like, if you ask me, are you afraid of rattlesnakes? Well, I haven't seen any rattlesnakes, so I guess no. Now, if I see one, yes, I've been around some rattlesnakes. They're very dangerous. And when I see them, I'm afraid of them. But, like people say, are you afraid of somebody breaking into your house? No, because all my doors are locked, and I don't let crazy people into my house. So, it's like you kind of create your life a certain way, So I'm not worried about security because I have very good security. I never leave my car unlocked. So I'm not worried about somebody stealing my car. That doesn't mean they won't steal it, but I'm not worried about it. They might steal it anyway.
No, but that's a
So,
great
you don't want to go around worrying about it, which a lot of people do. And, you hear stuff like this all the time, oh, this is going to be the last election. People on both sides in America said that. On both sides, that's hyperbolical, because there is a constitution and most of the people around in the government know about it and they realize they have to stick to it, even if they don't agree with it. So, it's like craziness, So they're all upset. They're upset about something that's never going to happen. Aren't you afraid of going around without having a gun? No, because I don't go around drug addicts. I don't go around criminals. I don't go into bars. I don't start fights with people. Who's going to bother me? Nobody bothers me. I mind my business. I'm polite. If somebody is a jerk, I just say, okay, goodbye. So what do I need to carry a gun for? Where I live, it's legal to carry a gun. You walk around. Yeah. Arizona, open carry. You see guys all the time with a gun on their hips. You go to a store, there's like 3 or 4 guys in there who have a gun. That's Arizona. That's the tradition in Arizona. People have been armed in Arizona from day one, and they still are. So it doesn't mean I'm going to walk around with a gun, because I sort of know enough to, even if I deal with a crazy person, I kind of know how to diffuse the thing. So if somebody comes up to me and points a gun at me and says, give me your wallet, what am I going to do? Pull my gun out and shoot him and get killed? It's dopey, give him the wallet. But I don't go into those areas. I don't go around those people. If you have any sense, you know how to stay around people that look like reasonable people. People who you can see, this guy's driving a nice car. He's dressed nicely. He looks like a rational person. He's not going to bother me, right? I mean, that's pretty much what you see, right? You go around and you see. But then every once in a while, I once met a mafia godfather. He came
Oh,
into a club where I was. Scariest person I ever saw. I didn't talk to him. He was a relative of one of the people in the band. I didn't know that. So the relative went over and said, "Hello, Uncle Joe, how are you?" But he was scary dude. You could see this guy had a lot of people murdered. And if you went like that, you were the next. So so I sort of know, all right, don't mess with him. There's a famous science fiction story about a guy who the Earth had been taken over by aliens, and he tricked one of the aliens into petting a rattlesnake. Well, when he petted the rattlesnake bit him and he died. And the aliens all left. They said, "This is a bad place. People die here." And they left. And that's how he defeated them. It's a famous science fiction story, short story. So, I don't go around petting rattlesnakes. I had a rattlesnake in my shed some years ago, big one. I called animal control. They were there in an hour, took them away. I'm not going to deal with that. I don't know anything about that. So, that's what this is about. You know who's a rattlesnake and who's a puppy dog and who's a pussycat and who's a lion. Because, people are like that. There's some people I can see, if I mess with this guy, this is going to be a lot of trouble. No thanks. I'm not going to do it. And the converse is also true where I see people, oh, this is a good person. See, and then I go out of my way to strengthen the relationship and take good care of this person because this is an upscale person. They're never going to give me any trouble. And all of that just comes from knowing these scales. It's really not hard to use this. I did all the heavy lifting in giving you these skills.
So, I'm actually very happy with this conversation. I think we covered a lot of interesting points. We discovered the topic, and then we also had a lot of use for these topics as well, and we showed like how we can take away the most value from it. I don't know if in your mind there's anything you felt like we hadn't discussed that is super useful to the listeners.
Well, there's one sentence that I'd like to say that I think will help everybody understand this.
Yes.
The data in this book are vital for every person and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random.
Right.
So you talk to most guys, if they're honest with you, they'll say they don't understand women. Guy loves his wife, has been married for time, but he doesn't understand her. Why does she do that? You know what I'd say? Get the book, analyze her across 35 skills, and then you'll understand her. See? His relationship will get better. He won't be going around saying, "I don't understand my wife." He'll understand her. I mean, there may be little things he does, because there's always going to be little things you don't understand. But, in the broad sweep of things, it's very liberating because you really get to see, okay, that's what this person is about. Like Abraham Lincoln was shot in the head. That's what happens to people at level 2 on the scale of basic purposes. Not unusual. Alexander Hamilton was at the same level, was killed by iron bar. Lots of people at that level, that's what happens to them. So when I see this, oh, okay, level 2. That's what happens. You don't see that happening to people at these other levels because they're a different type of person. They're not going to let that happen. Like Jefferson was a level 3. People at level 3 don't have that happen to them. He lived a long life, died as an old man, you know, unlike Hamilton, who was killed at 51. Even though he was brilliant, different level. So when you find out where a person is, you know what to expect, and you can predict what they're going to do. So I am almost never surprised by anything that anyone does if I've had enough time to pay attention to them previously. Like a lot of people are surprised at things that Donald Trump does. I'm not surprised at anything he does. I understand him perfectly. I'm not saying I approve or I condone or I agree. I'm just saying it's predictable. Like if you know horses, there's certain things you need to do and not do. If you don't know them, you could get really hurt. You can get killed from a horse. But if once you know, okay, here's how, see, you can deal with this creature who is 5 times your size because you understand horses. And this is the same thing. I would never tell anybody who doesn't know anything about horses to go horseback riding unless they get lessons, unless there's somebody there who's experienced to show them, do this, don't do that. Because amateurs like that are the ones who get hurt because they don't know what they're doing. I'm not going to have any trouble with a horse. I know how to ride them. So it's like that with people. It's the same. So I hope you will use this and benefit from it.
Yeah. So, well, thank you, Jim, very much for the conversation. And maybe if you once again want to tell us where exactly people can find out more about the book. You said it's
Okay.
your website, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
where they can go and find out more about this topic.
Yes. The website is septemics.com, Septemics, where you can see what many readers have said about it, what many journalists have written about it, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself. And there's even a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics that you can listen to for new people. You just turn it on and I explain it in 15 minutes. So it's a very user-friendly website. I invite you to go there and check it out.
Wonderful. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time, sitting down with me, explaining all of it to us. And I will say bye, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.